With our very special guest this evening. G. Edward Griffin is here with us. Mr. Griffin, thank you for joining us again on Revolution Broadcasting.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Creature from Jekyll Island is, of course, considered by many to be, the go-to place for the history and the information about how that entity was created. The creature itself. You want to give our listeners a little review of what that book was going to tell them if they should decide to purchase a copy?
Well, yeah, I guess that's really the only purpose of talking about it is to explain what it is, why we would call the Federal Reserve System the creature from Jekyll Island. It surely is puzzling to anybody that doesn't know the history. The fact of the matter is that the Federal Reserve System was actually created on Jekyll Island. It's not a mysterious mythical island. It's a real island, and it's off the coast of Georgia. And it was on that island back in 1910 that the Federal Reserve System was conceived. And that seemed strange to me when I first started to do my research, that something as important as the nation's banking system and the monetary system, the unit that controls all that, would be created in a private island.
Right, you would think this should be a public debate, an open debate in Congress maybe, or something.
Yes, of course. So that aroused my curiosity, and then I found out even more curious things. The island was owned in those days by a small group of billionaires from New York, people like J.P. Morgan and William Rockefeller and their business associates. It was a resort island. There were some beautiful mansions there. They have a beautiful clubhouse there, and they called it the Jekyll Island Club. And by the way, that clubhouse is still standing. You can go visit it and see the actual room where they created the Federal Reserve System. They've even got a plaque on the door that says Federal Reserve right on the door. And
it's the claim to fame of the island and the club.
Yes, it is. They're very proud of that fact. So even though most people have never heard of it, it seems so strange. I'd never heard of it before I started to do my research. They were drafting something that became the Federal Reserve Act, which passed into law in 1913, and it was offered to the American people as a bill to control the big, powerful bankers. They had a phrase for it in those days, but they called it to break the grip of the money trust. That was a little, like almost a slogan. You could find it in all of the political campaigns of the candidates at the time.
Right, because at the time, the general populace had an understanding that there was this power that existed. They called it the money trust. There was a bit of an understanding in the public debate about this.
Exactly, and everybody wanted Congress and the government to break the grip of the money trust and put it back in the hands of the people. That was the image. Well, lo and behold, it turns out that the people that drafted the bill to do that were the money trust. These were the wealthiest people in the world, or they represented firms that were owned and run by the wealthiest people in the world. I mean, we're talking about J.P. Morgan and all of the Morgan banks. We're talking about the Rockefeller dynasty. We're talking about the Kuhn-Loeben Company, which represented the Rothschilds in England and France. We're talking about the Warburgs, the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. We're talking about the First National Bank of New York. All of these huge investment firms with control of the insurance industry and all of the brokerage houses. This was the money trust, and it represented altogether about 1/4 of the wealth of the entire world.
So they pulled a fast one, is the short version.
They pulled a fast one, yeah.
They had
so that was the reason for the secrecy.
They had the American people convinced that they were going to put an end to this powerful entity known as the money trust, and in fact it was them the whole time behind the scenes plotting to further their operation.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that trick being pulled over and over again throughout American history in politics. We're seeing it being done in spades in Washington right now. So much of this legislation is coming through, supposedly to control the banks and put sanity back into the economic sector. And it's being done by the very people who ruined the economic sector in the first place. It's just a means of consolidating their power. Well, anyway, I'm off the track on that, but that's how it all started. And that's the reason for the title of the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island.
That is it. That's where it was born. And, of course, that was 1910, as you said, that they met. And it was just a few short years later, 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act made its way through Congress under questionable circumstances, to say the least.
Well, yeah, some people question it more than I do. It was enacted during the just before the Christmas recess, and there weren't too many people there actually in the House to vote on it. And but, however, as I look at it, most of the congressmen were already on record as being in favor of it. So had they been there, they surely would have voted on it. But I do think that there was a little bit of a strategy to the Christmas session in that by doing it in that fashion, they avoided debate. There was hardly anybody there to debate it, and that they just didn't want anything brought up in the form of negatives at all. So I think that, in that sense, it was a brilliant move. But it surely would have passed anyway.
Right, and once again, to bring that back, that the trickery involved. I mean, we see the same things going on these days in Congress. These bills, thousands of pages long, and there's no way that there's enough time for our congressmen and women to read these bills, yet they're being voted on and they're being passed.
Yes, and so who's responsible for that? I'd say any congressman that passes a bill without reading it ought to be removed from office.
We agree 100%. That's one of the planks of the Retake Congress platform, of which this event is kind of all about. But yeah, I mean, now going back to 1913 for a minute, the Federal Reserve Act passing was one of three kind of the trifecta that I've been referring to it as that happened that year. The other two were the 16th Amendment being ratified under, once again, questionable circumstances, to say the least, and the other was the direct election of U.S. senators. Do you think that there's any direct ties to the same group on those two other items?
Well, yes, I think it's pretty clear. If you want to dig beneath the surface, a lot of people don't really have much of a taste for looking beneath the surface of world events. They want to just, gloss over what shines and glitters, trying to change it in the direction of what they call collectivism. It's a word that many people are not familiar with, but collectivism had a very definite meaning to them, and historically it has a very definite meaning. It simply means a concept of government in which all power is at the top, and the people are little ciphers and meaningless at the bottom, and they sacrifice themselves for the state, all in the name of being for the greater good of the greater number. This is the ideology behind communism. This is the same ideology behind fascism. This collectivism is the killer of freedom, and this concept, collectivism, has been growing and been fed and nurtured by this group that we're talking about starting a little more than 100 years ago. So when they formed the Federal Reserve Act and passed the income tax and also arranged for the direct election of the senators, it was all part of this larger move, not just for financial power, but for political and social power over the nation.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of H.R. 1207 working its way through Congress now, we're basically at the halfway point where half of the House of Representatives have co-sponsored this bill at this point, and yet it's kind of being blocked up, not seeing the light of day. It's not even coming out of the Barney Frank is holding it in committee so far. Now, what do you think of this bill? Do you think it's doing some good? Do you think it's generally a good idea? Is it helping the cause, or ultimately do you think it is just leading us towards replacing the Federal Reserve with a global version of a central bank?
That's a very perceptive question. I have mixed emotions about this bill. In The Creature from Jekyll Island, which was published way back in 1994, I dealt with the issue of auditing the Fed, because even then, I think it was Congressman Gonzalez or somebody like that had every year put forth a bill to audit the Federal Reserve System, and of course it never got anywhere. But he always put it in the hopper every year. And a lot of people even then were saying, well, what do you think about auditing the Fed? And my answer then was that we don't need to audit the Fed. we need to abolish the Fed. Well, why do we want to audit the Fed when we can tell right on its surface that it's a scam, that it